I wanted to go back to this image because it shows the growler. Funnily enough, it seems to come up in most frog talks seem to get round to it. It's probably the most studied frog in Victoria, I would think. David mentioned bioacoustic recorders, and that's an example there. They're devices you can put into the field and program, like we program it to capture every 15 minutes, 15 minutes every hour, simply because it's the only way we can rationalise the amount of files we get to study. I will say that we've got a number of these and we're quite willing to loan them out if people want to study frogs in an area. It's so much more efficient way than just walking into an area and say, can I hear the giant burrowing frog? It took us 3 years to actually get a recording of the giant burrowing frog. That's why I was very interested to see whether they managed to photograph it. Okay. Go on the next one, thanks. So, getting information, most of our work was done along the Merry Creek. This was all part of a PhD project by Brendan Casey. He ended up with 44,000 calls to get structural information. Most of the calls were in the evening and least in the afternoon and evening. We're able to classify them as fast, growl or grunt. I'll talk more about them. 600 of these calls we couldn't classify. We may see if we can actually hear the growler. No, I'm not very hopeful.
That would help.
Try it again.
Is the volume turned up?
I have to give up.
Give me the best conversion.
I would say though, I make the claim that I think the Growling Grass Frog has the most complicated call of any frog in Victoria, at least among the common ones. I don't know if David would jump up and down and give another candidate for a more complicated call, but
You might play it off the app, it might be very loud.
okay. So this is where we actually sampled along the Merry Creek near the Hughes Freeway. You can see the Merry Creek there, the recorders attached to the trees, so we're just above the surface. This graph we found very interesting. You can see how many calls we made, but if you're ever trying to record the growler, at least in this area, 0 calls between February and November. All our calls were from October through to the end of January. We did not record one call, and we certainly tried. The graph at the top there is the water temperature, which may be related to that, but it shouldn't rely exclusively. No. I'd be interested to talk to Justine with her experience with the growler, whether this is unique to this area or whether it's a more common feature of the growler. Go on to the next slide. We can classify them as fast, which was by far the majority of the calls, growl and grunt. There's some discussion about whether the grunt should be classified as released or territorial or what it should be, and we had a bit of discussion at the last meeting about this. I'm not going to go into that again, but we were advised by the underwater calling paper to call them release calls. And some of the features of the calls we can see there. If we go on to the next slide. So the most common call is the fast call. which typically comes in these sort of 3 or 4 brackets with quite clear peaks in them, and what we refer to as amplitude modulation between them. The graphs here, the bottom one just shows the amplitude of the call. The top one is the frequency distribution with colour coding, so the higher amplitudes are in orange there. But if we go on to the next one, this is the growl call, which is quite different. It's quite dense. It's virtually one long continuous sound. You really can't hear any interval between it. And so it's a single note. There's no distinct pulses like there were in the previous one, and it's a fairly narrow amplitude difference along it. So it's a fairly continuous sound. If we go on to the last one, the growl call, completely different. The grunt call. This is a completely different call. We didn't find many of these, and these calls can be hard to pick up. They're often buried in amongst the other calls. So if we go on to the next one. So this is actually that call that, I don't know your name, Jane played before. This is actually yours might be a different one to the one I was trying to play, but anyway, this is actually putting that sound recording into RavenPro to have a look at, and this is just looking at amplitude, and most of the calls here we can pick up a fast call. But when you listen to the one that I had, right at the end you can pick up the growl call. Couldn't pick up a grunt call here, but as I say, they're far less frequent. One other feature we observed was called chorusing. And this is where you get a continual band of calls over our 15-minute window, and it's still going at the next one. We don't know actually whether they stop between or they keep going, but this is a phenomenon we picked up occasionally. That's not the Growling Grass Frog. I just happened to pick up that one as an example of a continuous call. But this idea of calling, and it seems to be related with when the water temperature is cooling and the water level is lowering, decreasing flow rate and a falling barometer. All of these factors seem to relate to chorusing. We also did correlation between species, and we can really classify warmer season callers and two cool season callers from the 6 most common frogs. Don't ask me to tell you which is which. I have written it down somewhere. I'm not sure David can tell you them all, but I'm not very good with the botanic names. I know L. raniforus is the growler, and I remember that one. And significa is the eastern common. They're the most common ones. But we looked across all our data at the environment variables to see whether the question really was with frogs, and I don't think anyone's ever been able to give a definitive answer. Why do they call at certain times, and why don't they call at certain times? We can correlate. The most strongly correlated variables were water temperatures, evaporation and UV radiation associated. But when I say correlated, a social scientist might think a 0.6 is a high correlation coefficient. Me as a background analytical chemist thinks it's very poor. There are relationships, but nothing that really stands out as very, very strong relationships, and no way that we didn't think any really reliable way that we can predict if the frogs would actually be calling.
Sorry, is that on a daily basis or a seasonal basis?
We looked across the whole year. The last question, I gave a talk last time on whether frogs can call underwater, or at least the growler can. Were the calls different to the ones above the surface? There are differences. If we just go through this is the fast one. If we just go through the other two, the growl call, there are differences in the time intervals and probably the density of the peaks, and particularly with the grunt call, there was quite a difference with that one. However, we're picking out the best ones to look at. There are still questions really, maybe there's more variation within the above and underground. We haven't got that many underwater recordings. I wouldn't like to stand up and claim, yes, they're definitely different. The ones we've pictured here are different, but yeah. So that's a bit of a snapshot of growling grass frog calling. I think it does back up what I said about how complex it is, the call of the growler, which makes it an interesting one to study. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Yeah.